August 23, 1968, 0105 hours. Duke Lap CIDG Camp, Central Highlands, South Vietnam. The NVA 66th Regiment is inside the wire. Buildings are burning. The operations center is engulfed in flames. 40 defenders are trapped in a blockhouse beneath the inferno, running out of ammunition, surrounded on 3 sides. They have been fighting since nightfall. The perimeter has collapsed. There is no way out. Then, the drone of twin radial engines overhead. Not the jet scream of a phantom. Something older, slower. A sound follows that none of the men on the ground have heard before. Not discreet gunfire. A continuous roar. A buzzsaw tearing through the jungle canopy. Every 5th round glows red. Tracers descending from the circling aircraft like a river of fire bending through the darkness. The jungle floor erupts. The attack stops. The enemy had a name for what was overhead. They called it the Dragon. Vietnam was a night war. The Viet Cong owned the darkness. They moved in it, attacked in it, melted back into it before American air power could respond. Isolated special forces camps, scattered hamlets, outposts carved from hostile jungle, all of them vulnerable when the sun went down. American air power in 1964 was built for daylight, fast jets, single passes. A-1 Sky Raiders and F-100 Super Sabres could deliver devastating ordnance, but they couldn't stay. 1 pass, maybe 2, and fuel forced them home. The guerrilla learned this quickly. Wait out the jet. Resume the attack. The Air Force tried flare ships, C-47s loaded with illumination rounds. They'd orbit over a besieged position, dropping magnesium flares that turned night into day. 2 million candle power each. The defenders could see the enemy massing in the tree line, preparing to breach the wire. But the flare ship could only light the killing ground. It couldn't do the killing. The Viet Cong adapted. When the flares ignited overhead, they simply stopped. Waited. Watched the parachutes drift and burn out. When the C-47 exhausted its load and turned for home, the attack resumed. Darkness returned. Men died. Captain Ronald W. Terry watched this happen. Terry was a fighter pilot, F-86 Sabres, F-100 Super Sabres, assigned to the flight test section at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. In early 1964, he deployed on temporary duty to Vietnam. He flew observer missions aboard C-47 and C-123 flare ships during night attacks on Special Forces camps. He watched from the cargo door as the flares lit the perimeter below. He saw the muzzle flashes, the men running between burning buildings, the enemy closing on the wire. The C-47 circled overhead, dropping light while the defenders fought alone. Terry described it later. The flare ships were effective at illumination but impotent as weapons. One night, a hamlet came under assault. The C-47 arrived, dropped its flares, and illuminated the attack in progress. The defenders could see clearly now. Enemy soldiers in the open, exposed, vulnerable. But the only aircraft overhead was the flare ship. It had no guns. It could only watch. The flares burned out. The C-47 turned for home. The hamlet fell. Terry returned to Wright-Patterson in mid-1964 with a question no one had answered. What if the light could shoot back? The idea wasn't new. It had been tried, dismissed, and forgotten 3 separate times over 40 years. 1926. First Lieutenant Fred Nelson mounted a .30 caliber machine gun on a DH-4 biplane at Kelly Field, Texas. He flew in a continuous left turn and fired at ground targets. The geometry worked. The gun stayed aimed at a fixed point on the ground while the aircraft circled. Army brass watched the demonstration and dismissed it. No tactical application. 1942, Lieutenant Gilmore C. McDonald proposed mounting side-firing weapons on patrol aircraft for anti-submarine warfare. The Navy ignored him. 1961. McDonald, now retired, met Ralph E. Flexman of Bell Aerosystems at Eglin Air Force Base. Flexman recognized what McDonald was describing, a weapons system the military had rejected twice but never disproven. Flexman contacted Captain John C. Simons at Wright-Patterson. Simons got approval for a proof-of-concept test. They called it Project Tailchaser. They mounted cameras on a C-131B cargo plane, drew crosshairs on the windows with grease pencil, and flew pylon turns over a target range. The cameras recorded what the crosshairs saw. When the film came back, the geometry was perfect. A 30-degree bank at 120 knots kept the aircraft's left side aimed at a single point on the ground, continuously, as long as the pilot held the turn. Simons flew the test missions himself. He proved it worked. Then the project went dormant. The Air Force had other priorities. Ronald Terry came home from Vietnam in early 1964 and discovered Tailchaser buried in a filing cabinet. He read the reports. He flew with Simons. He immediately understood what everyone else had missed. This wasn't theory anymore. Men were dying at night because help couldn't stay. A flare ship could orbit for hours but couldn't fight. A fighter could fight but couldn't orbit. Terry had watched both limitations kill people. He saw a C-47, slow, unarmed, capable of flying all night, and imagined it with guns. Terry was tenacious. He was also willing to break rules. When he needed funding for weapons tests, he used his personal American Express card. He recruited Lieutenant Ralph Kimberlin, project officer for the new GESUU-11A minigun pod. The minigun was revolutionary, electrically driven, 6 rotating barrels, 6,000 rounds per minute. It didn't care about dude rounds. A gas-operated gun needed each cartridge to fire to cycle the action. A dud meant a jam. The minigun's electric motor kept the barrels spinning regardless. Dud round, the rotation extracted it, ejected it, and chambered the next. The gun kept firing. Terry and Kimberlin ran live-fire tests at Eglin Air Force Base in mid-1964. They mounted 3 miniguns in a C-47, 2 firing through the rear windows, 1 at the cargo door. They flew pylon turns and opened fire. The results were extraordinary. At 6,000 rounds per minute per gun, 18,000 combined, the individual shots blurred into a continuous roar. Every 5th round was a tracer. From the ground, the fire looked like a solid red stream connecting aircraft to Earth. But that visible stream was only 20% of what was actually falling. The other 80%, invisible. A 3-second burst from all 3 guns covered a 52-yard ellipse on the ground. 1 round every 2.4 yards. Put another way, a bullet in every square yard of a football field. November 1964. Terry briefed General Curtis LeMay, Air Force Chief of Staff. Multiple 3-star generals in the room opposed the project. Old aircraft, untested concept, resources better spent elsewhere. LeMay listened to Terry's presentation. He looked at the test footage, then he made his decision. Take them to Vietnam and try it out. Terry arrived at Bien Hoa Air Base on December 2, 1964. Armed air police met him on the tarmac with orders to send him home. The local command didn't want him or his experimental gunships. Vice Chief of Staff General McConnell overrode the order. By December 11th, the first test aircraft was ready. Serial number 4-3-4-8579. The airframe was older than most of its crew. Powered by 2 Pratt & Whitney R-1830 Twin Wasp radial engines, 1,200 horsepower each, designed in the 1930s. The aircraft's first flight had been December 17, 1935, exactly 32 years after the Wright brothers flew at Kitty Hawk. Now it carried 3 miniguns and a gun sight borrowed from an A-1 Sky Raider. Terry's initial aiming method was improvised. Hold the target between the left propeller hub and the top of the engine cowl. Kentucky windage at 3,000 feet. December 15, 1964. First daytime combat test. The guns worked. December 23rd, first night mission. The Dragon was about to breathe fire. December 23rd, 1964. Night. Tran Yen, Mekong Delta. A Special Forces outpost came under attack. The call for air support went out at 23:45 hours. The FC-47 Sai, the designation meant fighter cargo, arrived 37 minutes later. The crew opened fire. One of them described it afterward. We opened fire and it scared me half to death. I thought the guns had blown up. Flames not only came out of the muzzles but also blew back inside. The miniguns at maximum rate produced 100 rounds per second. The sound wasn't discrete gunfire. It was a continuous roar, a buzzsaw tearing through the night. Flames erupted from the gun ports. Spent brass cascaded across the cargo deck. The airframe shuddered. From below, the tracers appeared as a bending river of red fire descending from the circling aircraft. The attack on Tran Yen broke. 4,500 rounds fired. 17 flares dropped. The outpost held. That same night, a second call came from Trung Hung, 20 miles away. Another night assault. The FC-47 diverted, arrived, and opened fire again. The second attack collapsed. Combined ammunition expenditure for the night, 9,000 rounds, 2 outposts saved. Between December 15th and December 26th, the FC-47 flew 16 combat sorties. All 16 were successful, nearly 180,000 rounds fired. The concept that 3 generals had opposed was now saving lives every night. February 8, 1965. Bong Son, Central Highlands. A single FC-47 loitered over a Viet Cong hilltop position for more than 4 hours. The aircraft fired 20,500 rounds into the fortified site. Ground forces counted approximately 300 enemy dead the next morning. Some sources reported 100 confirmed kills with an additional 150 bodies dragged away during the night. General Joseph Moore, USAF Commander of Air Operations in Vietnam, watched the footage from Bong Son and immediately requested a full squadron. The capability was no longer theoretical. The FC-47 could stay all night. It could illuminate the battlefield and destroy the enemy simultaneously. It could deliver sustained, accurate fire on a fixed position for as long as ammunition lasted. The typical combat load, 24,000 rounds, 45 Mark 24 magnesium flares. Loiter time, 5 to 7 hours, all night if needed. July 15, 1966. Phong Dinh Province. Viet Cong forces attacked a Republic of Vietnam outpost at night. A guerrilla loudspeaker announced to the defenders, "We are not afraid of your firepower." 4 AC-47s, the designation had changed from FC to AC, attack cargo, responded simultaneously. 48,800 rounds fired before 2 F-100s arrived with napalm. The attack ceased. By mid-1966, the enemy knew exactly what spooky was. The Americans called it spooky after the call sign. The South Vietnamese called it Puff the Magic Dragon after a popular song. The Viet Cong had their own name. They called it the Dragon. Captured documents contained standing orders. Do not fire at the AC-47. The logic was practical, not superstitious. At 3,000 feet, small arms fire was largely ineffective. Shooting at the aircraft revealed your position. The Dragon would answer. Better to hide, wait for it to leave, and hope it didn't see you first. Some orders went further. Do not attack the Dragon, as weapons are useless and it will only infuriate the monster. The Vietnamese Air Force 817th Combat Squadron officially adopted the name Fire Dragons, Phi Doan Tam Tram, Moi Bay, Hoa Long. October 11, 1966. Kien Phong Province. A single spooky defended an outpost under sustained assault. The aircraft fired 43,500 rounds. 96 aerial flares dropped. When the ammunition was exhausted, the crew flew back to base, reloaded, and returned to the fight in 30 minutes. Single mission record for rounds expended. Captain Ronald W. Terry flew over 200 combat missions in the AC-47. He received 2 Distinguished Flying Crosses. He had pushed the weapon from concept to combat in less than a year, funding early tests with his own credit card, overcoming institutional resistance, and proving that a cargo plane from the 1930s could become the most feared close air support platform in Vietnam, the weapon that turned darkness, the guerrilla's oldest ally, into a kill zone. February 24, 1969. Long Bin Army Post, 3rd Corps. Spooky 71, serial number 4-3-4-9770, 3rd Special Operations Squadron, was flying a routine fire support mission. The aircraft was in a pylon turn, guns firing, flares deploying. Another night over Vietnam. The loadmaster was Airman First Class John Lee Levitau, born November 1, 1945, Hartford, Connecticut. This was his 181st combat sortie. Major Kenneth Carpenter was piloting. Airman First Class Ellis Owen was manning the guns. Navigator William Platt was at his station. Sergeant Edward Fusey and the rest of the crew were in the cargo compartment. Levitau had just armed a Mark 24 magnesium flare and passed it to Owen. Owen held it with his finger through the safety pin ring, ready to deploy through the open cargo door. An NVA 82mm mortar round struck the right wing. The explosion detonated inside the wing structure. It tore a hole more than 3 feet in diameter through the aluminum skin. The fuselage was perforated with over 3,500 shrapnel fragments. Navigator Platt said later the plane was lit up like daylight. All 5 crew members in the cargo compartment were slammed to the floor by the blast. The armed flare was torn from Owen's hands. When it left his grip, it pulled the safety pin free. The fuse activated. The smoking flare rolled loose on the cargo deck. Surrounding it, ammunition cans containing 19,000 rounds of live 7.62 millimeter. In fewer than 20 seconds, the flare would ignite at over 4,000 degrees. It would burn through the aircraft floor. It could detonate the ammunition. It would destroy the plane. The aircraft was banking steeply, wounded, shrapnel everywhere. John Levitau had over 40 shrapnel wounds in his back and legs. He had partial loss of feeling in his right leg. He staggered to his feet. First, he dragged a wounded crewmate away from the open cargo door. Then he saw the flare. It was rolling wildly in the aisle, smoking, the fuse counting down. Levitau fought the steep bank angle. He was losing blood. He threw himself bodily onto the flare, hugged it to his chest, and began crawling toward the rear of the aircraft. The bank angle was trying to roll him back toward the ammunition. The aircraft was shuddering, perforated, barely controllable. Levitau kept crawling. He reached the cargo door. He hurled the flare out into the night. It ignited the instant it cleared the aircraft. A magnesium sun blooming in the darkness below. Major Carpenter regained control of the crippled Spooky. He landed safely at Bien Hoa. All crew members survived. Levitau described the mortar blast as feeling like being hit by a 2x4. He was evacuated for treatment of more than 40 shrapnel wounds. He recovered. He returned to Vietnam for a second tour and flew 20 more missions. May 14, 1970, Armed Forces Day. President Richard M. Nixon presented John Levitau with the Medal of Honor at the White House. Levitau became the lowest-ranking airman and the first enlisted United States Air Force member to receive the nation's highest award for valor. The medal citation didn't capture what happened in those seconds on the cargo deck. It couldn't. The geometry of it, the steep bank, the loose flare, the countdown, the ammunition, the choice to grab it instead of jumping clear. It wasn't recklessness. It was the same logic that built the weapon itself. The problem was unsolvable until someone solved it. Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force Jim Finch said this when Levitau died on November 8, 2000. John Levitau for years has been woven into the fabric of enlisted heritage. Through his heroic efforts, he was the embodiment of our core value, service before self. His name has become synonymous with excellence. The Air Force's highest honor at enlisted professional military education bears his name, the John Levitau Award. A C-17 Globemaster III, serial number 96-0005, was christened the Spirit of Sergeant John L. Levitau. His name is spoken at every PME graduation. 19,000 future senior NCOs and counting. The AC-47 was slow, maximum speed 230 miles per hour, attack speed 120 knots, a World War II airframe in a modern war. It operated low, 3,000 feet above ground level, within range of heavy machine guns, mortars, and light anti-aircraft artillery. The aircraft had no armor, no self-sealing fuel tanks. A direct hit meant fire, structural failure, or both. August 1966. The 4th Air Commando Squadron was forced to withdraw from operations over Laos after losing 6 aircraft to concentrated NVA anti-aircraft fire. The trail was defended by radar-guided 37mm and 57mm batteries. The AC-47 couldn't survive that environment. 19 AC-47s were lost during the war, 12 in combat, 86 crewmen killed. March 9, 1966, Battle of A Shau. The A Shau Special Forces camp in the northwestern corner of South Vietnam was under assault by 2,000 NVA regulars. A 400-foot cloud ceiling forced aircraft below treetop level. Spooky 70, serial number 4-76290, responded. Pilot, Captain Willard M. Collins. Co-pilot, First Lieutenant Delbert R. Peterson. First pass. The miniguns devastated enemy positions in the open. The NVA had not expected the Dragon at that altitude, in that weather. Second pass. Coordinated 50 caliber machine gun fire from multiple positions knocked out both engines. Collins crash-landed the crippled aircraft on a mountainside. Staff Sergeant Robert E. Foster had 2 broken legs. Collins and Peterson could have been extracted immediately. They stayed to defend Foster rather than abandon him. The enemy attacked the crash site within 15 minutes. Collins and Foster were killed in the initial assault. Peterson charged an enemy machine gun position to cover the helicopter rescue of survivors Brown, Turner, and Meek. He was last seen alive crawling behind the wreckage, wounded, still firing. His body was never recovered. Both Collins and Peterson received the Air Force Cross posthumously. It was the only instance in Air Force history where both pilots of an aircraft received the AFC. It was the only AFC ever awarded for heroism in both air and ground combat. The gunship legend says no outpost under AC-47 protection was ever lost to the enemy. That claim survived the war. It may be true, but the AC-47 itself could be lost. The Dragon could be killed. 86 men proved that. The AC-47 flew its last combat mission in Vietnam in 1969. It had proven the concept. Every gunship that followed descended from it. AC-47D Spooky became AC-119G Shadow, then AC-119K Stinger, then AC-130. A Spectre in 1968, bigger, faster, heavier armed. The lineage continued. AC-130H, AC-130U Spooky 2, AC-130W Stinger 2. Today, the AC-130J Ghost Rider. 31 in Air Force Special Operations Command. First combat, June 2019. The pylon turn remains the fundamental maneuver. 30-degree bank, guns on the left side, continuous aim on a fixed point. The geometry Fred Nelson proved in 1926 on a biplane still works on a 70-ton turboprop gunship with a 105mm howitzer. Columbia operated the AC-47T Phantasma into the mid-2010s. The side-firing gunship concept remained operational for over 50 years. The AC-47 changed how isolated positions could be defended. It proved that loiter time and sustained fire could replace speed and single-pass power. It created an entire category, the close air support gunship. But the men who flew them don't remember the doctrine. They remember the sound. Ground troops remember the drone of the radial engines first, then the roar of the guns, then the tracers, a red river connecting sky to earth, bending as the aircraft banked. They remember the silence after, the attacks that stopped, the dawn they lived to see. One veteran wrote this decades later. She had been a service club girl with 3rd Brigade, 101st Airborne Division in Phuoc Vinh in 1968. One night, Charlie was coming through the motor pool and about to overrun us. It was dire enough that I was given a pistol. Then, Puff showed up. It was the most beautiful sight I've ever seen, all those red tracers in the night. I dearly love all you spooky guys, even though we never knew who you were. Thank you. Thank you. The Spooky Brotherhood, the AC-47 Gunship Association, holds reunions every September. Over 100 air commandos attended the memorial dedication at Hurlburt Field Air Park on September 9, 2016. The plaque lists all 86 fallen crew members by name. The commemorative Air Force Gulf Coast Wing operates the only confirmed flyable AC-47 today. Serial number 43-49297. Painted in 4th Special Operations Squadron markings. Tail code EN-086. The 086 honors the 86 men who didn't come home. It flies at air shows. The sound of those radial engines still turns heads. August 23, 1968, Duke Lap, CIDG Camp, Central Highlands, 0105 hours. The NVA 66th Regiment and 20th Sapper Battalion had been attacking since nightfall. Buildings were burning. The operations center was engulfed in flames. Defenders were trapped in a blockhouse beneath the inferno, running out of ammunition, waiting to be overrun. Then, the sound of radial engines overhead. The miniguns opened fire, every 5th round a tracer, the visible stream only 20% of what was actually falling. A river of fire descending from the circling aircraft, bending as it banked. The jungle floor erupting in 52-yard ellipses, 1 round every 2.4 yards. Over several days at Duke Lap, AC-47s fired 761,044 rounds. 1,162 flares dropped. The camp held. The Viet Cong had a standing order: do not attack the Dragon. 86 men flew into the night and never came home, but no outpost they defended ever fell. The Dragon kept its word.